afternoon. It's August 6th, 1998. I'm Marcia Cohen, and I'm interviewing Florence and George Eisenberg in their home. George, could we start with you? Could you tell us about yourself, where you were born, how to spell your name, things like that?
Okay. I was born in Omaha at 2624 Blondo Street. In 1924. Birth date is March 6th. And I was delivered by Dr. Rubinitz in my folks' home at that time. Not everyone was going to the hospital, and he did many deliveries of children in their own homes. As I was growing up, we decided that we had to leave that neighborhood because my mother was very uncomfortable there, and we moved to 26, let's see, it was 28th and it was 1728 Lake Street, and we stayed there for many years. At that time, my dad was in the fruit and vegetable business, and we had many interesting neighbors. Next door to us was Leo and Dave Bieber. Leo's name he goes under the name of Camisar because I understand that he lost his father and he was adopted. And at that time I went to Lake School, and we were close enough to Lake School that we could hear the school bell ring, and we'd run from our house to the school to make it on time. This is the area that I grew up in, and after graduating from public school, I went to Tech High School.
Could you tell me about your family, brothers, your aunts, uncles, grandparents?
Yes. My brother was Hy, named Jaime. They called him Hy, Eisenberg. And he was 4 years older than I. And my mother maiden name was Silverman, and her mother was Gussie Silverman, and her father was Solomon Silverman. And Solomon Silverman came to this country before his wife, because at that time he only had enough money to have a passage for one person. And he got into the fruit and vegetable business when he got here, because that seemed to be the easiest way to make a living, particularly if you couldn't speak the language very well. And then after that he sent for his children, my uncles and my aunt. And we were...
You all lived close together in the
Yes,
same area?
they lived in the south part of the city, but it wasn't too far. It was near Burt Street. I think there was a synagogue there near Burt. Do you recall the name of the synagogue, Florence?
No, but it was, I think, on 18th and Burt. Or was it 18th Chicago?
In that
Something
area.
around there.
Well, they attended that synagogue, and I used to go to services on Friday night with my mother. And my mother had a very good friend who used to call us on Friday. Her name was Mrs. Siegel, and her daughter is Lois Siegel, who is now Lois Endelman. Is that correct?
Right.
So we used to, that was my first introduction to steady going to synagogue.
And your father came from?
My father came from Russia, a little town called Shibina. I don't know how to spell it, but I think it's like Shibina. It was near a bigger city called Volochysk. I don't know how to spell that one either, but that's where he came from. And he immigrated to the United States also on his own initially, because when he was about 18 years old, the residents of that small town would come back to their village to clear up their their estates and their legal things and sell their property. And some came back to bring their wives back to the United States with them. And sometimes the wives refused to go back. So in every case, the wives didn't go back to the United States because they kind of were staying where their family was. They didn't want to leave their mothers and fathers. So Dad used to tell me that many times when the Jewish friends of his would go back to the other country to get their wives, it wasn't always an easy situation to get their wives to leave. So, however, in most cases, I think they did leave, and in most cases, the children left. And Dad got to New York, I think when he was about 18 or 19 years old, and he contacted his uncle, who lived in Brooklyn, and his uncle tried to get him a job and got him involved in getting into the business of collecting scraps from the textile industry, better known as the rag business. So he collected scraps, and sometimes they were bolts of material from mill ends where they would run a certain amount of dresses, and they would finish their orders, and they could have had 100 yards left or 200 yards left. And then they would sell him this material also, who he would in turn sell to people who were selling yard goods for people making clothes. And he stayed there for quite a while, and he found out that my mother and her father, who were in Omaha, because my mother's father was also from a small town nearby where my dad lived. So they used to call it, this is your Landsleit, or your countryman. So he was invited to visit Omaha. So he bought himself a ticket on the train and come to Omaha to visit. And my grandpa introduced him to my mother, who Dad said she was the prettiest girl he's ever seen.
She
And
was beautiful. I have a picture of her when she was 17 years old. She was so lovely.
Yeah. And my dad said, I didn't date anybody else. I says, why not? He says, nobody could come close to your mother. I says, that's great. So he dated her for a while, got married, lived with the father-in-law for a while. And while he was living with my grandpa said to him that since you've had experience in Europe in buying and selling, and my dad's father had a trading operation out of his home where he bought grain, and Dad used to haul it to the next town for either for money or for machinery. He said, come down to the old market in Omaha and you can work for me. So Dad come down to the old market, and he worked for my grandpa for about a week. And the pay was so small, he said to my grandpa, I think I'll buy a horse and wagon and I'll sell produce, because it was easy to get introduced to the wholesalers. And Dad bought a horse and wagon. He also moved out of my grandpa's house, and my grandpa had a barn that would hold 2 horses. So Dad wanted to be separate. As you know, it's kind of uncomfortable living with the in-laws. So he got himself a house. The house had a barn, and that's the address I was talking to you about on 26th and Blondo, where he lived. So Dad started getting in the produce business that way. He also rented a stall on the old market to sell fruits and vegetables. The stall was located across the street from where the upstream brewery is right now. And he had one stall, then he rented 2 stalls, and he sold fruits and vegetables on the market for, about 7 or 8 years. But the problem was, in the wintertime, everything would freeze, so you needed a winter job. So he had a relative, his name was Fellman, who had a coal yard, and Fellman hired a lot of the old market guys to deliver coal with their horses and wagons. So all you had to do is have a horse and wagon and a steel bucket to carry coal to people's apartments that had the coal stoves there. Dad did that one season, and he said to my mom, "I'm not going to do it again because it's breaking my shoulder." It's virtually making his shoulder raw, because carrying up stairs 2 and 3 flights with a coal bucket on your shoulder that's made out of metal was having its toll on his physique. It was virtually tearing him up. So he decided to try to stay in the fruit and vegetable business on a year-round basis. And he got together with some other peddlers who they started to do some pool buying several hundred bags of produce like potatoes and onions and other items and sell, kind of like a cooperative thing. And he found that there was a place for rent on 10th Street, specifically 414, 418 South 10th Street. It's now housing Brugger's Bagels and the State Farm Insurance. It's across the street from the Embassy Suites Hotel. It's close by to the ConAgra. And he rented that place so that he could have produce stored there in the wintertime, so that when he went out to peddle, the merchandise wouldn't be freezing and he'd have at least shelter. And that was the only place available to rent, by the way. So he eventually turned into a wholesaler, because as soon as he opened up, all of his buddies who were peddlers decided they wanted to buy from one of their friends. And Dad seemed to give them real good prices, which aggravated all the other wholesalers. And his business started to flourish. At that time, he selected one of the peddlers to be his partner, and that was Mr. Harry Reutstein. Harry Reutstein is an old family in Omaha. His daughter's Sonia Forbes, and he had a son, has a son, Maury Reutstein, that formerly was a dentist. I think Maury Reutstein now is in the Bloomkin home. And he continued on that business until prior to the war, where he decided that he had to remodel the front of the building because it was virtually falling apart. Remodeled the building, and specialized in selling to food processors who bought large amounts of merchandise. For example, Kitty Clover Potato Chip Company used to buy truckloads from him. Well, the other produce people were not selling in full truckloads. They were selling more or less to grocery stores who bought small amounts. He continued on in that business for quite a while, and when I got out of the service, I wanted to work for him, but I couldn't because he had a partner there, and they had an agreement that none of the children would enter the business.
You tell a very, very good story.
Thank you.
We're going to take a pause with you and hear from Florence for a little bit.
Good.
Okay. Florence Eisenberg, E-I-S-E-M-B-E-R-G. My maiden name was Nuremberg, N-E-R-E-N-B-E-R-G. My parents were Samuel David Nuremberg and Ella J. for Jacobson. Ella Jacobson Nuremberg. My father was born in Russia and served in the Russian Army in World War I, and decided he had had enough of Russia by that time, and went to get an immigration number from the American Embassy. Well, the number was quite far in the distance. It would take him 2 years before, according to the quotas and everything, he would be able to enter the United States legally. So he decided he couldn't wait, and he went to Cuba. He lived in Cuba for about a year, and then he got an offer from a guy for so much money he would bring him over and let them go on the beach in Florida. Well, the INS was waiting for the guys when they got there, and they caught him. And they didn't send him back to Cuba, they sent him clear back to Hamburg, Germany, where his original boat shipped out of. And so he worked for a while in Europe again, and then went back to Cuba, and his original quota number was coming up. So he came in through Tampa, Florida, on his original number, and went directly to New York to live with his father's sister, his mother's sister, I beg your pardon, Pearl Weisberg. Lovely lady. I'll tell you about her later. He lived with her for a while, and one day she said the immigration people were looking for him. They wanted to know why, after they deported him, he came in on a good number, and they couldn't figure it out. She says, "You've got your father's sister in Omaha, Nebraska. Her name was Sarah Goodbinder." And she said, "Go to your Aunt Sarah, and they'll never look for you in the middle of the country." She says, "It's too far away. They won't bother you. Go." So he went. They never did look for him. And he was an unregistered alien, I guess, for a long time because he was afraid to apply for citizenship. Well, a few years later, he met my mother. My father, when he first came here, got a job with the streetcar company, and he was a streetcar conductor. And he got on this line that my mother used to ride back and forth to work every day, especially coming home. But in the meantime, his aunt and my mother's grandmother, she was raised by her grandmother, were in the same hospital room for some reason at the same time. And they said, "Have I got a boy for you? And have I got a girl for you?" And so he knew all about Mother, and he had seen her before. And she got on the streetcar one day, and he said, she asked for a transfer. He says, "I'm sorry, Miss Jacobson, but you can't have a transfer. You have to ride to the end of the line with me." She looked at him, and she says, "Who are you?" And he told her who he was. She says, "Oh." So she rode to the end of the line with him. Well, they started going out, and 6 months later they were married. My mother was raised by her grandparents because her mother died when she was only 2 years old, leaving her and her 2 older brothers. And her father, Samuel Jacobson, was having a hard time taking care of the children. But he met a woman from Tennessee, Chattanooga, Tennessee, and he persuaded her to marry him. And she came up and she married him, and she was taking care of the children. And she said, "I don't like living here. I want to live down in Tennessee." She says, "You go down to Tennessee and get a job, get a place for us to live, and I'll come down with the children." Well, he did. He went down there, got a job, and sent for his wife and the 3 children. Well, the wife came without the children, and he never questioned her or anything. The children were just abandoned. And my mother was taken care of then by her grandfather and grandmother, Wolf and Toby Krasny. And the other members of the family couldn't raise the kids or didn't want to. My mother was born in Lincoln, Nebraska, by the way. And so the other relatives brought the kids to Omaha. And my great-grandfather was very poor, could only afford to keep Mother. And there was a Jewish orphanage sponsored by B'nai B'rith in Ohio called Belfair. And that's where the boys went. They would come home for visits, but that's where they were raised. And so, mother was raised, had a tough childhood. My father had a tough childhood. His mother died when he was about 8 years old. His father remarried, and his new mother didn't like the boys and made them live in the barn. They couldn't even eat with the family. So my father, in order to have something to eat, indentured himself to a storekeeper for a year. And he made him sleep in the back of the store and eat scraps from the family. That lasted a year, and then he found another man who hired him, who treated him much nicer. And he got to even have a cot to sleep on, and he got to eat with the family. And then he worked for him for a while, and then joined a stepbrother in Odessa, Russia, where he lived until he had to serve in the Russian army. So both parents had really tough upbringings. My father never got to go to school, but he was self-educated and very well educated, by the way. My mother went to Kellum School in Omaha and graduated from Tech High School. And very, very bright lady. Excellent cook. And she was a gourmet Jewish cook, and not only was everything delicious, but her presentation was gorgeous. Just beautiful. She set a lovely table. And we started out poor, but Mother and Dad finally did better and better and better. And I got to go away to school. I went to my first school I went to was Saunders School for the first half of my kindergarten year. Then I went to Belvedere School till the middle of the 5th grade. Then I went to Clifton Hill School for the remainder of my elementary school education.
What kind of classes did you like?
Oh, just general classes. Of course, music and art. And I loved English, and I loved history and social studies. And didn't care too much for math. Although I was pretty good at it, but I didn't care for it. Then I went to Benson High School, and I took college preparatory courses there. And when I was 6 years old, I started taking piano lessons from a lady called Abernathy, Miss Abernathy, who came to the house and gave me weekly lessons until she said to my parents that she couldn't teach me anymore. So I went to a different teacher near Benson. Her name was Mildred Rush. She was on about 50th and military. I went to her for lessons for many years. And in the meantime, when I got to be 10 years old, a friend of my parents was Eddie Butler, who was the staff organist and pianist for WOW Radio at the time. He also played the organ between the movies and the stage shows down at the old Orpheum Theater. And he taught me to play organ. I was his only student. And I'd have my lessons at the Orpheum Theater on Saturday mornings. I would go real early when the cleaning crews were there before the people were coming in the theater. And I'd practice. About 10 o'clock I had my lesson. And I'd practice some more. In the meantime, all these famous band members were coming in, like Cab Calloway and Bob Crosby and all kinds of other people, and all these wonderful acts. And I have a wonderful autograph book filled with their autographs. And they were so dear to me and so nice. Here I was, this little teeny thing, on this great big huge organ, and they got the biggest kick out of me. And I used to practice 3 times a week at the Good Shepherd Convent, or Eddie Butler arranged for that. And the nuns would accept nothing to allow me to practice there. They were just delightful to me. There was this little teeny weeny nun called Sister John who used to answer the door. I'd ring this bell, and it sounded like it was echoing through the whole convent. She'd come and greet me, and she was so dear. And she led me into the Mother Superior's chapel, And that's where I practiced organ 3 times a week. I rode my bicycle in all kinds of weather to go practice. And finally, when I graduated high school, I went away to Juilliard School of Music in New York City for 2 years. And then I had an emergency surgery. I had an abdominal surgery, a twisted cyst on the left ovary. It was nothing too major, but my mother and father insisted that I come home. So I transferred to the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. Went to school there for 2 years. And had to start as a freshman because I had only music credits from Juilliard. But I had all this music behind me. And finally, after a total of 4 years, I quit and got a job. And during that year, I met George. And we got married. I finished my college education after my kids were all in school.
What about your brothers and sisters?
Well, all right. I have a sister, Cheryl. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a sister, Cheryl Lerner, who is 6 years younger than I. She lives here in Omaha. She's a delight and a joy. I'm glad that she's with us. She's only been back in Omaha for 4 years. She lived in Beloit, Wisconsin, and Rockford, Illinois for many years. I have a brother, Bill, who is 12 years my junior, and he lives in Baltimore, Maryland. And he and his wife live on the outskirts of Baltimore in a little town called Cockeysville. And she is a doctor at Johns Hopkins. And Bill does wonderful work with the symphony and the chamber music series there. And he also does personal promoting. And he's always very, very busy. They do a lot of traveling. We have 3 children. The first of which is Cece. She was born Cecily Gale Eisenberg. Her name is Belle Rose. She's married to David Belle Rose. They live in Windsor, California. It's in Sonoma County in wine country. And we're the proud grandparents of Rachel Ann, who is now 5 years old. Our son Joseph, our middle child, his name is Joseph Irvin Eisenberg. He lives in Lincoln with his wife Lois, who converted to Judaism before their marriage. They have a son, Ben Eisenberg, who is the spinning image of the man that he's named for, George's father. It's uncanny, the resemblance. It's just beautiful. Then I have a son, Stephen, my youngest, who is a resident of Omaha, and he has a son, Samuel Aaron Eisenberg, who is another joy. All 3 children are very, very smart, very, very beautiful, and what else can I say? I'm their grandmother.
I'm sure your parents felt exactly the same way about you, too.
I'm sure.
And it sounds like you came from warm, loving homes. Tell me a little bit about some of your family dinners or celebrations, things that you remember when the holidays come around and you think back to the holidays that you had as a child.
Well, when we had a Jewish holiday, that meant you're going to eat a hell of a lot. My mother would be cooking for 2 and 3 days prior, and she always recruited me to come in the kitchen and help her. I was the guy that cleaned the dishes, dumped the garbage, ran the errands.
He does the same for me.
Yeah, I was the household backup person, and I thoroughly enjoyed it because she used to let me sample stuff as we worked all the time. So,
God forbid she made grievous.
yeah.
They never saw the light of day.
Yeah.
You.
Grievous are, I guess, rendered chicken fat, but when you eat them, it's like popcorn. It'll kill a person in about 3 weeks if they stay on it, because I think it's about 100% cholesterol. But anyways, Mother used to do a good job in cooking the dinners, and she used to make her kugels, her Luxemkugel, potato kugel, cake, apple pie, One of my favorite pies was a lemon meringue, and she used to make the crust nice and crispy without being wet and soggy. And she used to make them tart, which I thoroughly enjoy. I hate pies that are overly sweet. So we would generally invite my grandparents and any other relatives that were around would come in.
For Passover, she used to make these wonderful little popover kind of things and fill them with a lemon filling.
Right.
It was so good.
She used to, yeah, she used to have a kind of a pastry filler and squeeze in that
That lemon filling.
lemon stuff, and then when you bite into it, it squirts all over your face. It was a good, it was a good pastry. And my dad, of course, whenever it be a very religious holiday, would handle the ceremony, and we'd sit around the table. And he was very good at handling the ceremony, because in Europe, in his town that he come from, the only way you could get educated was go to a school where the rabbi taught, because that was the only teacher. And the rabbi would teach them how to write and how to read Hebrew, and said to my father's father that your son is the best student, and he said, I think he ought to become a rabbi. So they were trying to coach my dad into being a rabbi. And he resisted it quite a bit because he just didn't think he wanted to get into that. However, the education he had paid off, because when we had Passover ceremony, he'd read that book so fast it wouldn't take us very long before we could eat. Because you know Passover can get drawn out and lots to say, and we take turns, but once Dad got the book, he would fly right through it, which we thoroughly enjoyed. So he was good in that. In fact, one of the reasons he was so successful in the produce business is he was one of the few fruit and vegetable peddlers that could write accurately, figure accurately, and keep the books, because most of them didn't have any knowledge about bookkeeping.
What language was spoken in your home?
In my home, my parents started out talking Jewish, and we picked it up. And then when they wanted to have a secret language, then they would switch over to Russian. Then when we would discover what they were saying in some of the Russian stuff, they would switch over to Polish. And by the time we would learn some of the Polish words, they decided they better speak English, because we followed their vocabulary so well that if they said a key word, we knew exactly what they were saying. So our house all of a sudden became an English-speaking house. And I still remember some of the words today. But they were one of the families that changed over to English very, very rapidly.
What do you remember, Florence?
Well, we had wonderful family dinners. There was nobody from my mother's side that came to the dinners because her brothers were not in Omaha. But my dad had a brother in Omaha, two brothers in Omaha. We used to have Passover dinners with them and Rosh Hashanah dinners and break the fast with them. And all of us kids would be sitting around the table and fidgeting during Passover services, you know, like they always do. And I remember wonderful cooking. My mother was a fabulous cook, as I said. She made wonderful kugels, and her chicken and her gefilte fish was so outstanding. And I remember the dad would take the horseradish out on the back porch and grate it for her to make the crane. And even outdoors, he'd come in crying and bring it in, and Mother would finish it in the grinder. And it was so hot and so strong, but so good. And we had wonderful Thanksgiving dinners. My mother would make a turkey and stuff it. We had lots of company. They had a wide circle of friends. And I learned to cook from my mother. I just helped her make things from as early as I can remember. My sister did the same. And I give all the credit to anything that I make today to my mother, because she was so good and she taught me so much.
You still have her recipes too.
Yes, and I still make the same recipes.
Her mother was a gourmet cook. They say the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. Well,
Every time George was come over when he was courting me, she would have Montebroit for him. Her Montebroit was outstanding, and that's what he simply adored.
she used to feed me pretty good.
Even after Mother and Dad moved to Phoenix, Arizona in 1954, we talked to him on the phone. George said, "Mom, when are you going to send me some Montebroit?" Next mail had Montebroit in it for George.
Yep.
How did you two find each other?
How do we find each other? Well, that's very easy. That's very easy. It was quite by accident. As you know, Florence is a musician. She used to play for virtually all the Jewish weddings in Omaha, with few exceptions. So when I returned from service, it seemed like most of the fellows in service were now getting married. So there was a wedding.
Wait, let me tell the beginning of that story.
Okay, go ahead.
One day, my dad used to love to go fishing in Minnesota, and he used to have this little 5-horsepower trolling motor that he used to take up there and then hire a boat and stick it on there and troll the lakes and do his fishing. Well, he brought the motor out to Carter Lake one day with us, my mom and my dad, my sister and my brother and I, and a picnic lunch. And we all went out on the lake and trolled around for a while. It was a beautiful, breezy day. We just had a wonderful time. And Mom says, "Well, I'm going to go fix the lunch." She says, "You girls can do whatever you want." So we took the boat out by ourselves. Well, Carter Lake, I don't know if you remember what it was like in those days, but it used to get lots of weeds in August in that lake. And they didn't have such a thing as weedless motors. So if your motor got, the propeller on your motor got caught in the weeds, you'd have to stop the motor.
No, that would foul the motor and stop it.
That's true. And you tilt it up, clean it off, and restart the motor and go. Well, so I was used to doing that. So I tilted it up, cleaned off the propeller, put it back down, and the starter on it wasn't a little switch, it was a recoil starter like on a lawnmower, like an old lawnmower. And so I pulled this wooden knob and I pulled it out and let go of it, and it hit the motor housing, broke off, and flew across the lake.
It ate the drawstring.
And the motor sputtered, and I tried to give it some gas and nurse it along, but the darn thing died. Well, luckily there were a couple of oars in the boat. My sister and I started to row back to shore. We were really far away. I could just see blisters coming up on my hands before I even started. So we were starting to row, and along comes another boat, a speedboat, with 2 men and a girl in it. And one of the men was George.
And the girl wasn't Mana Lewinsky either. It was just a girl that we knew.
Okay. So anyway, he says, "Would you like a tow?" He had seen what happened. And we said, "Oh, yes, thank you." So he towed us to the lake, to the dock, and they took off right away. I didn't get a chance to thank them or anything. So we had our picnic lunch with Mom and Dad, and I saw that he had come back to the dock with the rest of the crew on his boat, and they were pulling up, and I said, "Mom, I have to go say thank you to this guy." And she says, "No." She says, "He looks like an Italian," she says, "and I don't want you getting involved in with anybody that isn't Jewish." And they forbade me to date anyone that was not Jewish, and I never did. I was really an obedient daughter. So anyway.
Not anymore. She's on her own now.
Anyway, I didn't thank him. That was in August, late August. In November, at the old shul on 18th Chicago, I played for a wedding. And there was George. And my parents were invited to that wedding as guests. And after the wedding, I was standing in the lobby with my father, and George walks up, and he says, "How's your motor?" And my dad says, "It's all fixed." And so he smiled and he walked away. Well, that evening, my parents and I were invited to another wedding at Bethel Synagogue. Esther Duboff was playing the organ. I didn't have to play. I was sitting with my parents. And 2 rows behind us was George and that girl and that other guy.
And that girl.
And so anyway, my mother says, "You know that guy from the lake and from the synagogue this morning? He's 2 rows behind us." She says, "He must be Jewish." She says, "Don't turn around." She says, "But he's back there." And so I said, "Okay." After the wedding, at the reception, we started to talk. He came up to me and we started to talk. And the orchestra started to play. We started to dance. And they had food there, but George says to me, "Would you like to go out and have a bite to eat with me?" I said, "Sure." So we went out on our first date to Cliff's, the old original Cliff's for chicken. And 10 months later, we were married.
Is this how you remember the story too, George?
She tells it better than I because her memory is a lot sharper. And women, as you know all the details. They can tell you what they wore,
I don't remember what I wore.
about the girl that was in the boat with me, and all
That
that
I
good
remember.
stuff, you know. I don't even remember anymore. But we met that way, and the minute that I started dating Florence, I realized that this is going to become very serious because Florence was one of the few girls that I had dated that had extremely high intelligence. She could talk on almost any subject. She had a good personality. She laughed at my jokes, if they were funny or not. We just had good times together, and we enjoyed the many cultural things together. I used to go to performances at the Playhouse, and I asked Florence if she wanted to join me, which she did. And then I found out later that she had some experience in New York in dance, and she was quite familiar with theater. And I didn't object to anything cultural going on in the city. So we had a good rapport going. We went to concerts together. And as you can see now, she was a very pretty woman and tall.
Still is.
Yes, I'm 6 feet tall. I think Florence is 5'8". And she was a real good dancer because years ago, dancing was our pleasure. We used to go dancing every week. And Florence was an exceptionally good dancer, so we could do the jitterbug and the cha-cha and all that sort of thing. So it was a kind of a fun relationship. And career-wise, my career was doing real well because I joined my dad in business.
You were back from the service?
I was back from the service, joined him in business.
Where were you while you were serving our country?
Well, I ended up in Germany, and during the last stages of the war, we were into Czechoslovakia. I spent some time in a small town called Charast, C-H-A-R-A-S-T, which is about 20 kilometers from Pilsen. So we stayed there until it was time for me to be eligible to be rotated back to the United States and then to get discharged. I was a sergeant in the service, and I was attached to a combat tank division, 8th Armored Division, 36th Tank Battalion. And even though we weren't in hand-to-hand contact with the enemy, but we were so close that it's like being about 3 or 4 blocks away. So, but the outfit that I was in specialized in the automotive work repairing tanks, trucks, half-tracks, jeeps, anything that would run. And the military sent me to an automotive training school in Texas. And I was in Camp Hood, Texas for a while. So I had all the automotive training, and it still carries on today. I seem to be able to fix everything most of the time.
It's wonderful around here.
Yeah. So my experience in the military was about 3 years' time. And then when I got back and I joined my dad in business, I started to take over the business because I was full of energy and I was pretty much on expansion mode. And when my dad's partner passed away, then it was just my dad and myself there on the market. And I decided to continue his specialty, selling potatoes. And we started to sell potato chip people, not only in Omaha, Kitty Clover, and Weaver Chips in Lincoln, but we started to sell Frito-Lay and potato chip companies on a national basis. I had a lot of guts that time. My dad was kind of a pussycat, but I was ready to take charge and chances. And then I changed our specialty to selling onions because the potato chip people started to merge together. They started to do pre-season contract buying. They didn't need a broker in the middle. And the only time they called me is when they were in a jam. But I researched the onion business and found that the competition wasn't that tough. They weren't merging with each other. So I turned my specialty into being a specialist in selling onions, both fresh and frozen. Got involved with major corporations in the frozen TV dinner business. When I left the business, we were known as the largest suppliers to the food processing industry in the United States and possibly the world. So we had tremendous volume. Most of our customers now have been merged into the ConAgra Corporation. In fact, if I was still in business, I'd only have to walk across the street because ConAgra is right across from where our business is. So I stayed in that business for quite a while. My brother Hy joined me, and we both did very well. When my brother passed away, I bought out his portion of the building from the estate. We had a pre-existing agreement that whoever would pass away, the other one would be able to buy the building so that there wouldn't be any family squabbles or anything. And now I own the building myself. I belong to the Old Market Business Association. I'm an active participant in it, trying to help other businesses improve what they're doing, create more tourism. I've arranged for the Director of Tourism and the Director of Economic Development for the state of Nebraska to come into Omaha and speak before our group. He'll be doing that next week. I take on all the heavy projects that everyone else can't do or won't do or doesn't do.
Well, most of them are actively running their businesses and don't have time to do it either. And George has the time and he loves doing it.
So I keep busy, you know.
You've certainly seen some changes in that area over the years.
The area has changed quite a bit. In fact, the Old Market area is the area that virtually 90% of all the elderly Jewish grocers are very familiar with because they had to be on the market to buy fruits and vegetables for their stores. And there was a heavy amount of Jewish families that had the mom and pop grocery stores all over town. One I can recall is the Lagmans had a store, and there was there was the Wines that had stores. I think I mentioned Lagmans. I'm not sure. Louis Market, Papirni's, they were our customers. So they all used to hang around on the market in the morning. And I used to get to visit with them and know them. So If there's a grocerman that had a store in Omaha, chances are that I sold him or I delivered to him. I'm familiar with their basements. I'm familiar with everything about the stores, including some of the restaurants in town that we had for customers. So the old market used to start in the morning like at 4:30 in the morning, because by the time that the wholesalers had their breakfast down on the market and got the produce out on the walk, it was about like 5:30 or 6, and the grocermen were there because they wanted to open up their stores at 8 o'clock. So in order to open up their stores, they had to be at the market early. So it was kind of a standard procedure to go to work driving with your lights on in the morning. So it was hard work, but enjoyable.
He left before breakfast and had his breakfast on the market.
Yeah, well, I didn't want to wake up Florence at 3 in the morning and say, let's have some breakfast. So
Goodness.
besides, they had a good restaurant. They call it Frank's Cafe. It was on 10th Street between Harney and Jackson. All the grocermen used to eat there. There was another restaurant next to Greenberg Fruit Company. Tony Minardi, it was called Minardi's Restaurant. Another restaurant on 11th and Howard. It's now the Russian gift shop. They call it the Red Square. There was Harsh's Cafe. He was a good operator, had big breakfasts in the morning. And Harsh's Cafe, by the way, was where some of the fruit peddlers used to hang out in the morning, because that's where they would divvy up the money that they made peddling the produce all over town the previous day. So they used the tables that people ate on to put out their money and use that as their desk. So the restaurant owner didn't care because we were his customers and my dad was his customers. So they used to have a lot of fun by doing that, and they kind of used that place as their office. And yeah, their hangout. And he was one of the few places that had a working telephone down there. So the market was a very interesting place, very good character building. Many doctors and lawyers used to work for the fruit and vegetable people while they were working their way through school. Dr. Longo, a physician, used to work for my dad, loading and unloading watermelons on Saturdays. So the market, I think, was the heart of the city. That's where all the action was going on. And downtown Omaha originally was in that area, right down from the railroad, from the Union Pacific yards and from the Western Heritage Museum.
That's what they call it.
Yeah.
You have wonderful stories to tell, and you tell them very well, very enjoyable.
Thank you.
Is there anything that you would like to say in conclusion?
No, I just wish that, except that I wish for my children and for everyone to be as happy as we've been and as lucky as we've been.
Well, my wishes are really basically the same. I just hope that our children utilize what we've done as an example of what they should do or could do, and they're starting to do it right now. They're not our twins, but we come from families that were very honest. We didn't lie, cheat, or steal. We worked hard.
Our kids are the same.
Kids are the same way. We weren't jealous of anybody. We weren't show-offs. We didn't even join the super country clubs because we just didn't feel that we needed it. It didn't do anything for us. Sometimes I'll buy a car and drive it for 4 years or 5, but you know, some of my friends buy cars every year. Well, that's fine, but to me, if it runs good, it doesn't give me any trouble, I'll run the wheels off of it as long as it's safe. Plus the fact that I'm mechanically knowledgeable and I make sure my automobiles are doing fine. So all I could say is if our children follow what Florence and I have done, there'll be no problem with them in their life and with their children's lives. And I really appreciate you coming down to videotape us, because there's no question in my mind that we would ever do this on our own. So I want to thank you both because you've done an excellent job.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.